Teresa Paulsen, I'm very excited to have you back on the EO report. I was just reviewing our YouTube account, and you now are 2/3 of all of the content that I have for the video. Thank you so much for being our A number one.
You're welcome.
So welcome back, Teresa. I just want to give anyone watching this interview about communications and election security here in the United States. Teresa is a go-to pro. She ran communications for ConAgra, was the CCMO for the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, and owns her own strategic communications firm based in Omaha, Nebraska. Teresa, again, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to talk about this.
Okay, so one of the fields that you offer strategic communication support to is elections in the United States. And we know headlines are questioning or at least raising questions about the security of our elections. And then we also had President Trump a week ago take time to do a national address about his questions about the election, which, that really raises some pretty important questions for me as a citizen, and I assume for other voters. So let's dive into it. One of the questions I want to ask is, who runs elections at the city, state level in the United States?
Elections are run by state and local jurisdictions. So, it could be your friends, your neighbors. Trained election officials run elections. We don't have federalized elections. We have federal resources for elections, but the administration of elections happens at the state and the local level.
So often when we read this fragmented news environment that we all now are in, back when you and I were growing up, there was CBS, NBC, and ABC, and now there's millions of quote news sources. And so when we see headlines, I know sometimes I'm like, well, how many people actually are worried about this? Is there any data that talks about how real is this concern that Americans have a lack of faith in our election systems?
It's a great question, and I do think that there is concern, and there's growing attention placed on the security of elections, which is fantastic because it's not something that we should ever take for granted. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of people, like I mentioned, who are working on elections. A lot of those people are dedicated to security of elections and making sure that our cybersecurity is fantastic, making sure that our physical security of our election equipment is robust. And so it is something to pay attention to. That said, some of the headlines and some of the attention is it's kind of over the top. And when you look at the data of surveys relative to voters and what they thought about their experience voting, the Pew Research Center actually surveys voters after federal elections, or not federal elections, but presidential elections every 4 years, and the midterms. And what they found after the 2024 presidential election is that on the local level, so within my community, do I trust the votes in my community? 95% of voters said that elections were run extremely well or somewhat well in their community. And even at the national level, 88% of voters said that elections were run extremely well or somewhat well. So that tells you that voters still feel a sense of confidence in their vote being counted as they cast it.
Right. It's really important for people to know that. And Pew is a very well-regarded national organization that does really important surveys. So then let's get to the security of the actual vote. Again, you support the election industry. How hard is it to get approved and to get the seal of approval that a company can work on an election?
pretty hard. So there's not a lot of voting manufacturing companies, and there are reasons for that. But one of the reasons is that it's very difficult to get certified at the federal level. Most voting equipment in the United States is certified in one way or another. Some is at the federal level, some is at the state level, and some is both. There are states who require state certification on top of federal certification. And so one example of a federal certification requirement is that 1.5 million ballot positions need to be counted correctly consecutively to earn federal certification for a tabulation machine. So that's just one example. There are lots of things that are tested. Another thing that I would say in terms of the accuracy of voting equipment, machines that count your vote, 98% of ballots, voting machines are backed with a paper ballot at this point. So you're either marking a paper ballot with a pen and feeding it into a machine, or giving it to a lock drop box that will then go into a machine. Or in many states, you're actually touching a screen and making your vote selection that way. Regardless, there's a paper ballot backup. And what that means is that there's a paper trail for all of our votes, and that can be audited. And that's a really important function of election administrators, is the actual audit of an election after the votes have been counted to make sure that everything happened accurately.
You, you and I have had a lot of conversations about this important topic, and this is one of my favorite stats or data points. Tell us how the voting machines are connected to the internet.
Oh, they're not. So voting equipment is not connected to the internet. Tabulation machines are air gapped, they're secure, they don't have Wi-Fi, they don't have internet, they're standalone pieces of equipment. They plug into a wall for electricity. They have a battery backup, but they don't connect to anything. They don't connect to each other. They're standalone. That is by design to prevent hacking and cyber attacks.
And I'm going to share in this video article that the Associated Press just came out with another summary of the election system, something to the effect of it's like literally impossible for somebody to come in and do a major hack of all of the systems because it's not on the internet. So I think that's really important for people to know. What else in terms of security around the voting process would you like somebody watching this to know?
It's a multi-layered security ecosystem. So there are what we talked about. So the air-gapped machines. There's also physical things, right? So access to the places where local election officials and state election officials get a jurisdiction ready for an election, right? So it's controlled access. The machines themselves have locks and tamper-resistant seals. So it's layer after layer after layer of security protocols that if they are tampered with, you can see it. It would be obvious. One other thing that I think is really interesting in regards to the United States, because we started off talking about who runs elections, is we have 10,000 jurisdictions across the United States. And literally, that means that we have 10,000 different ways of running an election, different processes. So that might sound chaotic and like, oh, maybe we could make this more efficient. Maybe we could, but what that creates is this patchwork of different things going on, so that if you were to try to have a negative impact on an election at scale, that would be, I don't want to say impossible, but it would be extremely unlikely.
And one other thing I'd like you to comment on. So what we're talking about here is trust in the results of elections and some of the strategic communications that goes into that, as well as the security. There's also the issue of interference. So misinformation from bad actors, foreign actors who may be trying to interrupt the harmony and trust of the American electorate in our elections. That is a real thing. Can you talk about misinformation as an act of information warfare?
Yeah, it is a real thing. And that's so there's misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. So kind of like malware. So that's when it is at scale and it is sophisticated. And it's real and unfortunate. So that's why I think it's so important for all of us to be as educated as we can be in regard to what's happening with elections. And I don't want to imply that nothing ever goes wrong with elections, because that certainly does happen. Mistakes are made. With so many humans being involved in the process, that's kind of inevitable that there will be some mistakes every now and then. And when we look at misinformation or disinformation or malinformation, let's just try to ground ourselves in the facts of reality. Lots of great resources out there so that we can all become more familiar with the way elections are run. We've got the National Association of State Election Directors, nasad.org/FAQs. We've got Center for Democracy and Technology. We've got securingelections.org. Lots of great resources out there so that when we're exposed to disinformation or malinformation, we can take it with a grain of salt or a big spoonful of salt and figure out, is this real or is this not real? One other thing I do want to talk about, because this came up really recently in regard to foreign interference, is voter rolls. So keep in mind, voter rolls are different than voting machines and what you cast your ballot on. Voter rolls, it's the listing of registered voters, right? And so a lot of states rely on DMV information, and in some states that information can be purchased. So recently we heard stories about foreign entities getting a hold of voter rolls in certain states. Well, it may be that they were allowed to purchase those voter rolls and we don't know what they were going to do with them. Maybe it had something to do with voting, maybe it didn't. But I just want to make sure that people understand that it's a complex system. When you hear about something like that happening, maybe it's nefarious. Does it affect the way that you cast your ballot? Absolutely not.
Okay, that's helpful on that. And as we kind of wrap this up, I know coming out of the 2020 election, right? So we know that when President Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden, that there was an elevated covering of citizens who were alleging that there was a nefarious outcome. Chris Krebs, who was appointed by the Trump administration to run CISO, which helps monitor the security of elections in the United States. Again, appointed by President Trump. He's a Republican. He and his colleagues did a report after the 2020 election and said it was the safest election in American history. So for me as an individual voter and also as a strategic communicator, that meant a lot to me. And I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. And in this video, we will hyperlink all of the different resources. So what I hear you saying is it's awesome for people to have elevated attention on this. Make sure and use critical thinking. Find your way to these resources, read them. And also, if you're interested in helping to protect this foothold of self-governance and democracy, volunteer.
Yes, absolutely.
Are
Yeah,
there
you'll learn a lot. If you volunteer to become a poll worker, it's a great look behind the scenes.
And one last thing, what about local resources like your county election
Yeah,
assistance, state resources?
yeah, good idea. So I don't know about all counties, but larger counties often have election resources online, do some FAQs, things like that. I know that almost all secretaries of state So at the state level, we'll have election resources. I know Nebraska has a Secretary of State's page on elections, and here are the facts and answer some of the questions that you may have. So, wherever you live in America, those resources are available to you to help you learn more about elections. So take advantage of them.
Yes. So we all have a role in protecting this
And vote, go vote.
and vote, volunteer, and make sure and be well informed. And when you see scary headlines, look into it.
Yeah.
Figure out what resources can give you the facts. Okay, Teresa Paulsen, our #1 returning commentator for the EO Report newsletter. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.